Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityurma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. A good morning and a happy new year to everybody. So the morning here seems rather snowy and and dark and dismal. I wish all our viewers across the world a happy and much better new year in 2021. So we are gathered here for a session, the first session of Ask Swami in this new year, where questions from all over the world are collated and sifted through and organized by our team. And then we discuss them. These questions are of various kinds, but many of these questions are questions of not just one person, but many people. So when we are taking up a question asked by a certain person, we should all listen carefully, because it could be your question, and you could be the one to benefit more from it than anybody else, from the discussion of the question and the answer. So I'll ask Diane to read out the questions.
Swamiji, thank you.
Good morning.
Yes, we start off with two questions of a similar nature. The first is Vikram, who asks, I think I conceptually understand Brahman is our real nature, but I find it extremely difficult to experience it because I feel it contradicts the workings of the mind. Therefore, gaining knowledge of the true self through the mind seems to be a futile process. Should the mind be even used as an instrument for self-realization? And then Ravi Shankar from Chennai, India asks a similar question. I understand that my true self is the eternal Sat Chitananda, and that our objective in our lifetime is to realize this truth. My question is that since consciousness by itself cannot reveal anything without the support of Maya, isn't our mind necessary for self-realization through the reflection of consciousness? Then is realization achieved through our mind? Is realization also a form of Vidya Maya?
Very important questions. And these two questions are actually two sides of the same coin. The role of the mind. On the one hand, we are told about Brahman, which is not an object, which cannot be seen, heard, smelled, tasted, touched. It cannot be thought of, it cannot be spoken of by language. It's futile to philosophize about it, speculate about it. So it does not seem to be an object, anything that the mind can think of, anything that the mind can grasp or comprehend. So it seems that the mind is not necessary for enlightenment, or mind cannot be used for realization. That's one side of it. The other side of it, what Ravi Shankar from Chennai is asking is, everything that we know is through mind. Consciousness by itself, it needs the world of names and forms, including the mind, to know anything at all. So, realization, doesn't it have to be in and through the mind? Doesn't it depend on the mind? And if it comes through the mind, it's still part of Maya. Then realization becomes a part of what he says, Vidya Maya. And the answers to those questions, of course, is yes. But we must understand this. To put all this in a short form, concisely, is the mind necessary for enlightenment, or is the mind not necessary for enlightenment? To put it even more succinctly, what is the role of the mind in enlightenment? If you want to put it in one question, we want to understand this. Big question. Why I said big question, this is an irrelevant story, but I can't help telling you. This wonderful Tibetan master I met many, many years ago. The Tibetans have different schools of Tibetan Buddhism. So one of the schools is called the Sakyapa. And their head, the head of, one of the schools is Gelugpa, whose head is the Dalai Lama, and who is the head of all the schools together. But of the four major schools, one of them is the Sakya school. And in the Sakya school, the head is called the Sakya Trizin. Not the present one. I met the earlier one, the one who was before that, who was a wonderful master. I didn't know much about him at that time. But anyway, I had gone to him with a question about, I had this bee in my bonnet about Tibetan Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta. So there's a long queue of people, and it was foolish of me to ask that question in that setting. But anyway, when my turn came, I bowed down to him, introduced myself, and I said, what is the relationship? I want to ask you, what is the relationship between Advaita Vedanta and Tibetan Buddhism? Madhyamaka, Tibetan Madhyamaka philosophy. And he was a huge man, and with powerful glowing eyes, he looked down at me, and as a newly minted monk. And he smiled, a little smile, knowing smile, and he said, big question, no time. Yes, a big question, but we will make time now for this one, about the role of the mind in enlightenment. So I'll try to answer this question in two parts. One is, I will take up the subtle philosophical aspect of it first, discuss the philosophy of it first, and give an answer to that. But also, the second part of the answer will be a practical part related to our sadhana, our spiritual practice. So these two parts. Question, what is the role of the mind in enlightenment? Is the mind necessary for enlightenment? Is the mind not necessary for enlightenment? And the answer is in two parts. First part, the direct philosophical issue here. This question is actually raised in a text called the Vedanta Sara, which we are studying now. Towards the end of that text, writing about 700 years ago, Sadananda Yogendra asks this question. Wait a minute. What is the role of the mind in enlightenment? The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad says, Manaseva anudrashtavyam. By the mind alone, this can be grasped or realized. This means the ultimate reality, Brahman, I am Brahman. By the mind alone, it can be grasped or realized. And then the Kena Upanishad says, Yan manasana manute. What cannot be realized by the mind? Inahur manomatan, by which the mind itself is realized or illumined, but which the mind cannot realize. And we hear again and again, avang manasagocharam, which is beyond speech and beyond mind. Now you see, directly from the Upanishads, two apparently absolutely contradictory statements. One says, by the mind alone it has to be realized. It is realized by the mind alone, manasa eva, by mind alone. And the other one says, what cannot be realized by the mind. Now, how do you reconcile these two? So, let us investigate this matter. The question is, what is the role of the mind in enlightenment? The broader question is, what is the role of the mind in knowledge? After all, we are looking for knowledge. Yes, definitely spiritual knowledge, realization. But let's first start with general the knowledge that the mind, what does the mind do? Then we will realize what can the mind do for enlightenment and what it cannot do for enlightenment. So what does the mind do? Here is the model of knowledge. What knowledge? Just knowledge in general. All the knowledge that we have all the time. What happens? When do you see, you hear, smell, taste, touch? When you think, when you remember, when you desire, love, hate, understand, remember, forget. All of these are all related to the mind. So what happens? What does the mind do in all of these things? What is the common role of the mind? This is a branch of philosophy called epistemology, study of knowledge. How do we get knowledge? Specifically in our case, we are interested in the role of the mind in getting knowledge. So this is how it works. Briefly, I will state as briefly as possible the Vedantic model, the Vedantic epistemology. So when you see a rose, a flower. What's happening? Let's remember the Vedantic model of the human personality, what we are. So, we are actually Brahman, that's what Vedanta wants to tell us, pure awareness, limitless awareness. But in this limitless awareness, through the agency of Maya, appears, not produced, appears. Body, mind, world, all of this appears. And in the mind, this limitless consciousness is reflected. You can use the word reflected, you can use the word limited. There are different models here. In Vedanta, there are different schools of thought. Avachedavada, limitation theory. Pratibhimbavada, reflection theory. But whatever it is, pure consciousness somehow appears in this mind. And not difficult to understand because the mind itself is within pure consciousness. So it's like if you hold a mirror and the mirror will reflect space. The mirror will reflect the sky. It's the nature of the mirror to reflect the sky. But notice the mirror is itself within space. So all physical things are within space. So if you hold up a mirror here, it will be within space. But it will reflect space itself. It will reflect the sky. In the same way, the mind which appears in pure consciousness, in limitless consciousness, reflects that limitless consciousness. And that reflected consciousness, in Sanskrit, Chidabhasa, is there in the mind, which illumines the mind, which reveals everything in the mind. And then there is the sensory system, the body, and the world. Now, what happens when you know a flower? When know a flower means see a flower. Light is falling on the flower, and the light from the flower is reflected back to the eyes, the lenses catch the image, then somehow, remember, by the time it comes to the eyes, the physical eyes, the lenses, there's no flower anymore, it's just light being reflected back. And by the time it goes into the eyes, it's not light also anymore. It becomes an image in the lens. And instantly, in a tiny fraction of a second, it's no longer an image in the lens also. What it becomes is a tiny bursts of electricity racing along your optic nerves to the brain center. How far we have come from the flower. And then somehow, in modern science, we have no idea how, these little bursts of electricity are presented to the mind in the form of a flower. The form of a flower. There's no real flower inside the brain. You would require immediate emergency operation if a flower got into your brain. But in Vedanta, it is called a vritti. A vritti literally means a movement or a modification. Imagine the mind to be a lake, and a vritti is like a little ripple or a little wave in that lake. Why is it caused? It's caused by the sensory input from the world outside. World outside to the senses, senses to the mind. All this is standard, we don't need Vedanta for it, you don't even need Sankhya for it. It's Nyaya philosophy. Vishaya, Indriya Sangyoga, Indriya Manas Sangyoga. So, object is connected to the senses, senses are connected to the mind. In the mind, there is a ripple, like a wave. And this wave has a content. It is about something. What is this? What is the wave? It's mind, it's chitta. But what is it about? It's about the flower. So, there's like a little image of the flower in that wave. And that wave, that vritti, is lit up by the reflected consciousness in the mind. So you have a vritti about the flower, and that is lit up by the ever-present reflected consciousness in the mind. Not the pure consciousness directly, but the reflected consciousness in the mind. And at that moment, we have the knowledge, I see a flower. There's a flash. Or it could simply be a very, very atomic kind of knowledge. Flower. Or even more basic, red. Something like that. So there will be a flash of knowledge. This is basically the whole the Vedantic epistemology of sense perception in brief. Notice the stages. By the way, here I'll go to what you might call a sidebar, a little footnote. Why? Those who have studied Vedanta, especially Vedanta Paribhasha, those who have studied Vedanta epistemology in detail, there's a text called Vedanta Paribhasha which goes in some detail into it. They will have an objection here. They'll say, Swami, you're leaving out the most unique part of this. And there's this part where the antakarana, the inner sense, the mind, it flows out through the sense organs and it envelops the object and it destroys or it removes the veil of obscuration, the avarana, and the underlying consciousness, reflected consciousness manifests that name and form. Then only we get the knowledge that it is a flower. That part I'm leaving it out. I just mentioned it to say that I'm leaving that part out consciously. We today, for whatever reason, we modern people, we don't think in that way of the mind flowing out through the senses and all. It's an added complication, enough to make your head spin. So I'm just leaving that out. I'm using the usual physiology and the psychology of perception, which we all study in school. So here are the parts. There is the vritti in the mind. Due to the sensory activity from the world, a vritti in the mind is created, a modification of the mind. And what is that vritti? A momentary wave in the lake of the mind about the object. Where did the object come from? It could be presented by the senses, something you see, hear, smell, taste, touch. Or it could come from within, from your own memory. The mind itself generates so many thoughts, feelings, ideas. So that causes a vritti in the mind. No matter where the content of the vritti comes from, once there is a vritti in the mind, this stage is called, I have to introduce the technical terms, vritti vyapti, pervasion by the mind or pervasion by vritti. Pervasion by vritti means the mind has a thought about it. That's the simplest way of putting it. As a sense, Swami Vivekananda puts it very beautifully. He says, in a lake, calm lake, if you throw a pebble into it, there will be widening ripples. Similarly, what is the pebble? Sense input from outside into the lake of the mind. So there is this ripple called a vritti. This thing is called, this whole process, in an instant, fraction of a second, much less time than it takes for me to talk about it. It happens. And it's continuously happening to us. We are seeing things, one thing, two things, three things. We are seeing one thing after another. We are hearing things. We are thinking about it. All of it comes in rapid succession. Not simultaneously, in rapid succession. And it seems to be a simultaneous, it's like the mind itself puts all these pieces together and creates a virtual environment in the mind. So this is vritti. This process is called vritti vyapti. Vritti vyapti. This term, it's important to learn this term because all of which I talked about just now, it is nicely encapsulated by one term, vritti vyapti. This is what the mind does. And then what happens? The reflected consciousness in the mind, it illumines the vritti. In a flash, because the light is there. Whatever is presented to the light is illumined. So the light is there, consciousness is there in the mind, the reflected consciousness. So the reflected consciousness illumining that vritti, all of this happening in a fraction of a second, illumining this vritti is called phalabhyapti. Phalabhyapti. The resultant cognition by pervasion of reflected consciousness. So, all of it is nicely summarized as phalabhyapti. So knowledge, and that phalabhyapti results in the knowledge, I see a rose. You might see a lot of complication just to see a rose. But this is actually not complicated. It's a less than 1 second kind of flash which happens together. Notice in all of this, knowledge in Vedanta, any kind of knowledge, sense knowledge, interior, whatever knowledge is coming, in your mind also, all of this knowledge, finally it is all in the mind, and the mind is illumined by reflected consciousness. Two things are necessary for knowledge. One is the activity of the mind, vritti vyapti. What does it do? It focuses the mind on a particular thing. We have any number of things. We need attention to be focused on something for knowledge to come. Right now when I look at this, I'm not looking at what is behind me. If I look at what is behind me, I'm not looking at what is here. So I am focusing the mind through the senses, eyes and ears and so on and so forth. This direction of attention, this results in a particular vritti. So that's stage one, vritti vyapti. And stage two is the ever-present consciousness. Which consciousness? Original, pure consciousness, the witness consciousness, the Atman, reflected in, channeled through, limited by the mind. That reflected consciousness illumines the activity of the mind, the vritti. So it is called phala-vyapti. Phala-vyapti plus vritti-vyapti, knowledge. Again, phala-vyapti plus vritti-vyapti, knowledge. Which knowledge? All knowledge. All knowledge. Phala-vyapti plus vritti-vyapti. If you are listening carefully, you will see where this is leading. Notice that the activity of the mind is absolutely necessary for any kind of knowledge. Activity of the mind is absolutely necessary for any kind of knowledge. Senses are necessary, but ultimately it has to come to the mind. If there is no vritti-vyapti, then the object will remain hidden in ignorance for us. I'm using Vedantic language. To break the veil of ignorance, what do you need? Vritti-vyapti. But to generate the knowledge itself, what do you need? Consciousness. What kind of consciousness? There's a little wrinkle here. Reflected consciousness. Reflected consciousness, shining on the vritti, gives you knowledge. Fine. So this is the model. Now, this works for seeing a flower, for eating a piece of chapati or bread, for reading a book, for listening to a Vedanta talk. Always. The same thing is going on. My words are creating vrittis in your mind, and the reflected consciousness in your mind is illumining those vrittis, and you are listening. I hear, then I understand. Then you start processing it. Multiple vrittis come. So, all kinds of knowledge are revealed in this process, vritti-vyapti, phala-vyapti, happening almost simultaneously. But now the fun starts when you say, I want to realize Brahman. What is Brahman? Brahman is the witness consciousness, the unlimited consciousness, whose reflection is in the mind. I want to realize Brahman. Then what happens? You say, go through the process of Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. You have to generate, for any knowledge, you need a vritti. So you're generating a vritti. How do you generate a vritti? Go to class, read about Brahman, study the Upanishads, meditate upon it, think deeply upon it. What are you doing? All of it is encapsulated in one term, vritti-vyapti. You're trying to get a correct vritti about Brahman. A precise vritti, a focused vritti, directed vritti about Brahman. This vritti is being generated so that the attention is turned to Brahman. And it basically, first thing is it's turned the attention away from the external world and inwardize it. The only reason why we can't realize our real nature is because we are continuously focused outwards. Either we are using our senses to be continuously engaged with sense objects, or in our mind we are thinking about what we saw, ate, smelled, tasted, touched, or our own reactions of pleasure or misery or frustration, fear, anxiety. All of it is about the world. All of it is about the world, about the body, about the mind itself. None of it is about the Atman, which is shining always in the mind. None of it. We have to turn it inwards. That is done by vritti-vyapti. So what vritti-vyapti is created. Now the crucial question. Next step in knowledge, phala-vyapti. The reflected consciousness must illumine the vritti. But it's like you are asking a candle to illumine the sun. What's happening here is, let me use a couple of examples. One is, at night, the moonlight illumines the world. So, and suppose there's no electricity and the world is illumined by moonlight. The world is the world here. The moon is like the mind, and the sun is like the Atman. I'll repeat that again. Sun is like Atman, pure consciousness. Moon is like the mind. And the world is just the world. How are we seeing the world? Light of the sun. The sun is still there, but we can't see the sun at night. It is beyond the horizon, so we can't see the sun. The sun is shining on the moon, and the moon is lit up by the light of the sun. The sun's light lighting up the moon is like reflected consciousness. Do you see the model now? Sun is like pure consciousness. The moon is like the mind. And the moonlight is like reflected consciousness. And the reflected consciousness now shines on the earth. How does it shine on the earth? Because the moon is facing the earth. That moon's facing the earth is like vritti-vyapti, the mind turned towards something. And the reflected consciousness is like reflected sunlight, which we now call moonlight, is now shining on the earth and revealing things on the earth for us. That is like ordinary knowledge. Pure consciousness shining on the mind is turned to various things. Whatever the mind turns to, vritti vyapti. And wherever there is vritti vyapti, the light of consciousness in the mind reveals whatever is in that vritti. It's called phala vyapti, and that's knowledge. Now what happens during an eclipse? What happens during an eclipse? The moon comes between the sun and the earth. And it's like the sunlight is falling on the moon. But it's like the moon is now turned towards the sun, as if. And instead the moon reflecting that sunlight back to earth, it sends the sunlight back to the sun, as it were. Now let me ask you the question. First of all, note that the earth will not be illumined anymore. The earth will be in darkness. There will be an eclipse, number one. So there is a moment in enlightenment we have to completely forget the world. It goes away by itself. But now, the light of the moon, which was sufficient to reveal things on earth at night, now that light of the moon is traveling back to the sun, will you say, now the moonlight has illumined the sun? Nonsense. The sun shines with 1,000,000 times more light than the moonlight. And the sun and the moonlight also belongs to the sun. It's none other than the sun's light. Not at all required. Not at all required. The sun reveals itself, let us say. Let us say. So it's a sort of example which works well, but not too well. The sun reveals itself. Similarly, in Brahma-jnana, enlightenment, it is necessary for the mind to turn away from the world and be focused on Brahman. How do you do that? By Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, by constant focus, inquiry, by meditation and prayer and purification of the mind, all of those practices, entire host of practices enabling you to turn away from the world, let go of our death grip on the world and focus on Brahman, on our real self. So by that will we know Brahman? No. No. The mind cannot know Brahman. But it turns away from the world towards Brahman. This is called vritti vyapti. Can it do vritti vyapti of Brahman? Of course. What we are trying to do all the time is vritti vyapti of Brahman. When we are studying, reading, thinking, hearing, reasoning about it, we are trying to raise a vritti about Brahman. Can it do vritti vyapti about Brahman? The mind can do vritti vyapti about Brahman. Is there phala vyapti, reflected consciousness revealing the ultimate consciousness? No, it is not necessary, and technically it will be there, because just like the moonlight technically travels back towards the sun, is reflected back. No, not at all necessary. Not necessary, and it cannot. It need not, it cannot reveal the sun. Similarly, the phala vyapti, the reflected consciousness in the mind, it cannot, it need not reveal the Atman. The Atman blazes forth. That is what is called the Atman revealing itself. In Vedanta terms, it's called swaprakasha, self-luminous. There's only one self-luminous thing, the Atman. That shining, everything else shines. By its light, everything is lit up. Tameva bhantam anubhati sarvam, tasya bhasa sarvamidam vibhati. And that one is you, the real you. You shining, everything else shines. By your light, everything is revealed. That real you shines forth. Not that it was not shining till now. It's just we didn't see it. We didn't recognize it. It was shining all the time, is shining now, will continue shining all the time. Even time is revealed by it. Time and space are also revealed by that shining. So that ever-luminous Atman shines forth. In devotional language, what do we say? It's not that you catch hold of God. God reveals himself or herself. God gives us the vision or vision of God. It's not that you have earned it or you have grasped God, you have realized God. No, that's the devotional language. In philosophical language, consciousness is self-luminous. Upshot, all of that. Can I put the answer in one sentence? Is the mind required for enlightenment or not? Answer is yes and no. Yes in what sense? No in what sense? Yes, now we can put it very precisely. Yes, vritti vyapti is necessary. One must make the effort, one must direct one's consciousness away, one's mind away from the world, towards God, towards Brahman, towards the self, and phala vyapti is not necessary. It is completely unnecessary. So in that sense, the Atman or Brahman is beyond the mind. It is true when the Kenopanishad says, Yan manasana manute, when what the mind cannot think about, what the mind cannot reveal. The mind can reveal the rose to you through vritti vyapti and phala vyapti. But the mind cannot reveal Atman to you. There will be vritti vyapti, but phala vyapti not necessary, cannot be done. The Atman shines forth. Swaprakasha. In that sense, the mind cannot reveal the Atman. It is the Atman which reveals the mind. Does the moonlight reveal the sun, or the sun reveals the moon? I said two examples I'll give. Even simpler example is when little kids, I remember we used to have tiffin at tiffin time, in school. And our parents used to pack little things in tiffin boxes. And tiffin boxes used to be quite shiny. So after eating, we would be naughty, we would shine. In the playgrounds, we would shine the sunlight back on the faces of our friends. And it'll flash from a distance. So what am I doing? I'm using the sunlight and reflecting it back on something. If I want to see something in a dark room, I go from outside and reflect the sunlight with my shiny tiffin plate into that room, and I can focus. It's like a beam of light. It can see what's in an unlit room. That's how worldly knowledge happens. Focusing the tiffin plate, vritti vyapti. And the sunlight reflected from the tiffin plate, reflected sunlight. Direct sunlight does not go into the dark room. The reflected sunlight is phala vyapti. But now suppose I want to illumine the sun itself. I turn the tiffin plate towards the sun. Of course, I have to turn towards the sun to see the sun. But is the little reflected light from the tiffin plate illumining the sun? Of course not. It's blazing forth with a billion times the light. And even the tiny flash of light from the tiffin plate also belongs to the sun. Similarly, all consciousness in our activities, day-to-day life, all our knowledge is lit up by the Atman itself through the reflected consciousness. And when the Atman reveals itself, you reveal yourself to yourself. You see, it's always revealed. It's a question of recognizing it. That question of recognizing, that's done by the vritti vyapti. So, when the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad says, manaseva anudrashtavyam, by the mind alone it can be seen. It's absolutely right. When the Kenopanishad, right in what sense? Vritti vyapti necessary. Without that, never. The Kenopanishad says, by the mind it cannot be realized. Absolutely right. In what sense? Phala vyapti not necessary. So, both are reconciled. It is necessary for the mind, and it is mind is also, it's beyond the mind. It cannot be done by the mind. Now, this is the philosophical aspect. The practical aspect of it, I'll just mention something here. Why? The first question Vikram asks is difficult. He says, mind cannot realize it. And Ravi Chandran, Ravi Shankar, he says the mind reveals it. Is it part of Vidya Maya? Why is it difficult for the mind to reveal the Atman? Why is it difficult for the mind? The reason is the mind knows only objects. Why? That's how the mind is designed. The eyes will know only objects out there. The eyes cannot see themselves. They cannot, you can see a reflection of your eyes, you can see a picture, a selfie of your eyes, but the eyes, the way the eyes are seeing that flower, that way the eyes cannot see themselves. In philosophy, they call it the problem of self-reflexivity. See this fingertip. I can touch other things with the fingertip. I can even touch other fingers with this fingertip. But this fingertip cannot touch itself. So, the mind knows only objects. And when the mind, after having read about Vedanta and Atman and the witness consciousness, all of that, begins to feel I've got it, the immediate tendency is, now how do I experience it? But what does the mind experience? Only objects. It will try to experience it objectively. Won't work. You can have the most extraordinary visions, but it's still the Atman plus a name and form. In mystical visions, it's Atman plus a name and form. See, even this is the Atman plus name and form. When you look at the flower, it is the same Atman. There is the name and form of a red flower. Only thing is, this is a part of avidya maya. what Ravi has said, avidya maya, the maya of ignorance. It covers the real nature of Atman. And our attention is drawn to it. The world, our attention is drawn to the world through raga dvesha, likes and dislikes, hate or love, fear or temptation, terror or temptation. I am scared of it. Of what? Not the Atman, name and form. I really want it. I am in temptation. Of what? Not the Atman, name and form. So, this is what is happening to me in the world. We are distracted by it. The underlying nature of the Atman is revealed by some names and forms which are called Vidya Maya. So those are the mystical experiences of gods and goddesses which all great mystics have had in different religions. So there also name and form is involved. If Vedanta asks this question, did you see it? Yes. Then it's not the Atman. I'm sorry. If you saw it, it's an object to you, an object to your consciousness. You could have seen it outside, you could have seen it in your mind. It's an object. So this is the story of the 10th person. I will not narrate it here. We all know the story. How people were counting, looking for the 10th person, counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and unable to find the 10th person. Why? I am the 10th person. I am not counting myself, but why not? Why not? Why is it so difficult? It's because I have been used to finding the people outside. Where did I find the 9 persons? Out there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I have pretty good cause to think there must be a 10th person there. Can't find him. So the 10th person is not there. It took somebody to point out to me that you turn your attention this way, towards you, the counter, and you will see that you are the 10th person. Even there in the example, it is still, I am a body. Here is a body. And I can count one more body. If you turn my attention towards the body, I can count it 10. Imagine how much more difficult it is for the Atman. It is not a body. It's not a mind. Not even a thought. What will you count as the 10th? What will you count as I, the Atman? It can never ever be objectified. And the tendency of the mind is to objectify. That's the problem that Vikram is facing. After getting a grasp on what Vedanta is saying, then this tendency of trying to experience the Atman as an object comes. We may not put it in these words. I may even say, I am trying to experience the pure subject. You can't experience it that way. What you are trying to do is making the fingertip feel itself. Can't. So it can't be done. It can be done in the way which I have just described. The way is through sadhana. 3 levels. Through the level of purification of mind, concentration of mind, and removal of ignorance. We have talked about it many times in the past. First level of obscuration, what it does is, at the grossest level of obscuration, the mind has so much conditioning, it will not allow you to be interested in Vedanta, in any kind of spirituality. We are so engrossed in the world outside, sounds and forms and fears and temptations. So, no interest. Even talk of Vedanta will, if you ever hear about it, talk about any spirituality at all, you hear about it, you will find it's not pertinent. I'm not interested in it. Either I'm doing well, things are going well for me. I'm rich and healthy and all my projects are successful and I have many wonderful things yet to accomplish in life. What is all this you're talking about? It doesn't seem of any use to me. Or the other way around. I have too many problems. I'm sick and poor and lonely, and I have so many unhappinesses. I have no time to think about your philosophies. Unfortunate, because this is the only thing that can help really. As the mind is purified, either through a long and painful process of experience in life, and begins to calm down and think that this is not helping, or by deliberate sadhana, by the grace of the Guru, you actually do sadhana, which is karma yoga, then one becomes interested. At that point also one may think that, yes, it is true, these things seem real, maybe God is real or Atman is real, but it's not for me, it's too difficult. It's only some great monks and spiritual seekers and mystics, not for me or not in this life. That's also a trick of the mind. Then the next level comes when one is convinced such a thing is there and one is pursuing it, the mind is scattered. So the mind has to be trained by systematically in meditation to focus. Otherwise the vritti vyapti will not come. The focus of the mind is necessary. So through japa and dhyana and meditation. Bhakti, one big role bhakti plays, devotion to God plays, is taking our attention, the flow of our emotions to the world, directing it towards God. The love of the world is collected and put towards God. It doesn't matter what happens in the world. What matters is that I love my Lord and my attention is on God. Finally, when a focused and purified mind, you come to Vedanta, stay with Vedanta. For both Vikram and Ravi Shankar, I will say that stay with Vedanta. The preliminary part of Vedanta, the fourfold qualification, and the hearing again and again and again. So these obscurations will be cleared away. Okay.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Yes, that was a full talk in itself.
I was going to say, on behalf of everybody, wow, thank you. So the next question is from Sujan M., who's from Bangalore in India. My question is related to text number 4546 of Vedanta Sara, where you mentioned that the experience of deep sleep is recorded by ignorance. If it is general ignorance or Maya, how can it record something? Memory is not present in deep sleep, then how can it recall the experience when we wake up? Maya has two powers, veiling power and projecting power. The projecting power doesn't work in deep sleep. Is it the veil created by Maya that has some sort of hole in it for a glimpse of Brahman? This question is important to me as you mentioned about the trap door during text number 69.
This is somebody who's listening very carefully to the Vedanta Sar classes. The question is, you say that, Vedanta says that deep sleep is also an experience. After all, we wake up and we say, I slept happily. I did not know anything. But wait a minute. You wake up and you're talking about it, then there must be some kind of memory involved. But Vedanta itself says that the mind has stopped working in deep sleep. You can't think, you can't remember, you can't comprehend, you don't even have the sense of I, let alone memory. In ordinary things we can say, yesterday I saw, or this morning I saw some snowflakes, snowfall in the morning. Now I can recollect it. Why? Because I actually saw it with my eyes and it was recorded in my memory. Mind was working, there was attention. Vritti, Vyapti, Phala, Vyapti, all of that was there. The mind recorded it, memory was there. Now I can recollect things from my memory. But in deep sleep, the mind was not working. It was asleep. How then do we recall the so-called experience of deep sleep? That's the question. And the answer is given, as he has pointed out in Vedanta Sara, very clearly. The answer is exactly what he has said. Ati sukshma bhi ajnana vritti bhi. What does it mean? By the extremely subtle modifications of ajnana. Look at the word vritti, which we used earlier. Same vritti word is used here. By the extremely subtle modifications of ajnana, ignorance, deep sleep is recorded. What does that mean? As he says, how can that happen? Ignorance cannot record anything, but actually ignorance can. See, one thing is it's a little bit of a problem, a little bit of an embarrassment for Advaita Vedanta. It's something that some bookkeeping has to be done to adjust things. You have just said deep sleep is an experience, and you've also said that there is no memory cannot work there. Then how do you recall that experience? How do you even justify that it's an experience? How do you claim that it's an experience without a memory? So, Vedanta has developed an escape route for this. It says that, but there is something like a memory. Notice that it's also something like an experience. It's not an experience like we have in the waking state. In the waking state, experience means senses are working, mind is working, and there's that full range of phala, vyapti, vritti, vyapti, everything is there. So also in dreams, we have an internal experience. And there is clearly subject-object. Deep sleep, no subject-object. And even if the deep sleep experience is an experience, notice the uniqueness of that experience. Every deep sleep is like every other deep sleep. When you fall asleep, Every dream is different from every dream. Every day's waking is different from every other day's waking. But every deep sleep we have ever had is exactly the same. There is it's featureless. No objects, no subject, subject-object melded together into one blankness. Even the sense of time, I slept for a long time or short time, that we know only after waking up. There is no length, so-called, of the deep sleep also. It's just blank. All the time it's the same. Not only that, all our deep sleeps, yours and mine and everybody else in the world and whoever has experienced deep sleep throughout history, they've experienced exactly the same thing. So if it's an experience, it's a very peculiar kind of experience. That kind of experience can be and is recorded in Ajnana, which is what is called our Anandamaya Kosha, and it is part of Maya. We're saying it's Maya, it is a part, it's a fraction of Maya. Maya, as we know, can be subdivided. You've studied the Vedanta Sara, so all these things are very clearly discussed there. Maya has any number of parts, and those parts are the Anandamaya Kosha for each individual jiva, the blankness we experience in deep sleep. It is dynamic. You see, if you ask, tell me, how can it record something? It can record because it changes. To record something, there must be a change. Your tape recorder or your digital devices, there's a little change there which records something. So, is Ajnana dynamic? Is ignorance dynamic? Yes, it is. How do you know that? Because notice how we defined ignorance or Ajnana in Vedanta Sara. It is Trigunatmakam, Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. And in Sankhya cosmology, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas are the constituents of Prakriti, and they are continuously changing. Sattva into Rajas, Rajas into Tamas, Tamas into Rajas, Rajas into Sattva. They are in continuous change. They are dynamic. It is this dynamic nature of ignorance which allows it to record. Beyond this, no more details can be given because there is nothing more to record. There are no details anyway. It is all the same. There is a blankness. Now the trapdoor which he mentions, that is not part of Vedanta. It's just something that occurred to me. I had heard or read in the talks given by a sadhu in Uttarakhand in Hindi, where he points out something subtle. He says, deep sleep is an experience. It's an absence, an experience of absence. Not the absence of experience, but an experience of blankness of absence. Just as we are experiencing objects here, in dreams we are experiencing thoughts and imaginations. In deep sleep we are experiencing the absence of thoughts, imaginations, objects. But the ego which says, I slept happily, I did not know anything, that is the waking ego. The ego which after waking up it says this. That ego was not there. It was not in deep sleep, it was not that the ego was there saying, I am sleeping happily, I am not experiencing anything. Never. That sort of thing doesn't happen in deep sleep. That ego was not there. Yet there was an experience handed over through a kind of deep memory. That's why the word is used, ati sukshma. Extremely subtle movements of Ajnana. Why extremely subtle? Because the word subtle is reserved for the mind. Gross for the body, subtle for the mind. Then what will you say about something if anything happens at the level of ignorance, Ajnana? Extremely subtle, ati sukshma. It's because of those movements at the level of Ajnana that experience has been recorded. And that was illumined by what? By pure consciousness. By the reflected consciousness, let us say, or pure consciousness. The witness consciousness illumines the movement, the deep sleep experience. That is handed over upon waking up. And this waking up ego makes a false claim. I slept happily. You should say, no, you did not. You weren't even there. If you can catch that little trick, it's like a fault line in Maya. It's a little fault line in the Matrix, let us say, Matrix movie, which has nicely trapped us in this illusion. It seems all very real and nice. There are little cracks here and there. Here's a little crack. It doesn't gel together. It's a very subtle point, but it's interesting. If you can catch what is being said, it's worth thinking about.
This question is from Adya B. from Princeton, New Jersey. I am intrigued by the thought I. I understand the I thought as a spontaneous modification of the mind with no external or internal stimuli. This contrasts with all other thoughts of the mind which arise either from external sensory inputs or internal stimuli from memory. Maybe this can also explain how the I thought arises spontaneously in the mind, even during deep sleep, where the mind is not active and then recalled in the waking state. 1, is my understanding of the I thought correct? 2, can you also please explain how an investigation of the source of I would lead to the source Atman, which is thought-free?
Yes, this understanding is correct. Not only is the understanding correct, that the very fact that attention has been drawn to the I thought, this is very good. This is extremely helpful for Vedanta. The one thought that is useful for us is the I thought. Not that it is the ultimate reality, but it leads or points to the ultimate reality. So the I thought, investigation into the I thought, does it lead to the ultimate reality? Yes. Mandukya Upanishad, 7th mantra, maybe the most important text in Vedanta, the ancient Upanishads. It says, Ekatma Ekatmanusaram, Ekatma Pratyanusaram. Let me see. Nanta pragyam na bahish pragyam na ubhayata pragyam na pragyana ghanam na pragyam na pragyam adrishtam avyavaharyam agrahyam alakshanam achintyam avyapadeshyam ekatma pratyanusaram. So, investigating the atma pratyaya, the thought of the I, that will lead to enlightenment. That continuous, this thought of I is bubbling up. Now you're right, that the I thought is unique. First of all, let us grasp that the I thought is a function of the mind. As you see, it is an I thought. And thinking is the very nature of the mind. What is the mind constituted of? Thoughts. And these thoughts are of various kinds. In Vedanta, broadly these are classified. The mind itself is classified into 4. The mind itself is called Antahkarana, inner instrument. Antahkarana, inner instrument. Proving thereby 2 things. 1, it is not an external instrument. What's an external instrument? Like our sense organs, they are in contact with the external world. Eyes are in contact with forms. Ears are in contact with sounds. Skin with touch and so on. Nose with smell and so on. The mind is not directly in contact with forms or sound or anything. The mind gets this information from the senses. So the senses are called external instruments. In contrast to these, the mind is called the inner instrument, Antahkarana. It gathers information from the external world through the senses, but it is not directly in contact with the external world. The second thing we gather about the mind is that it's an instrument. It's not you. That's an important point. An instrument is not you. When I'm speaking through the microphone, I'm not the microphone, thank God. So, an instrument is not you. You are the user of the instrument. You are the user of the mind, the internal instrument, and the external instrument, the senses. The I thought is one of these thoughts. The inner instrument, so-called mind, inner instrument, in Vedanta, 4 aspects or 4 functions are distinguished. Mana, buddhi, chitta, ahankara, the mind itself. It's just, and then chitta, memory, and then buddhi, intellect, understanding, and ahankara, I, ego. So the I thought is one of the functionings of this inner instrument, is one of the functionings of the mind. I'm using the mind in a broad sense. Each of these functionings, mana, buddhi, chitta, ahankara, has been precisely defined. So what is the definition of the I thought? What is the definition of I thought, the ego? It is abhimanatmika antakarana vritti. That thought, the same word again, vritti. All today's whole session seems to be about vrittis. The same thought, the same vritti, that thought which is of the form of abhimanatmika, the appropriating function. What does appropriating function mean? Whatever else is going on in that inner environment, this thought, this I thought, its one function is to say, it's mine. So a thought comes. The I thought will say, I am thinking. You see a flower, And you don't just say flower, you say, I see a flower. A desire for a cookie comes. You don't say cookie desire, you say, I desire a cookie. I. Where is this? Notice everywhere the I is inserted. Right now, talking. You don't say talking is happening. What will you say? I am talking. What's the fact? Talking is happening. But who is this stranger I which comes in and says, I am talking? I am speaking. So this I is connected with all the functionings of the mind, with all the functionings of the motor organs also. Walking, talking, grasping, all of this. Everything that is happening in the body and mind, the I, consciously happening, the I appropriates to. And that's the function of the I. Why would it do that? Very important function that lends unity to everything that's happening in the body-mind. So you feel this jiva, I am a sentient being with all these things happening around me. Pleasure, pain, desire, memory, understanding, activities, my role, my identity, my personality, my story, all of that is centered around the I. So you can see it's a very vital function. Psychologically, it's a very, very important function. Otherwise, you'll just fall apart. The whole thing would just be processes going on. Another curious thing about the I. Generally, let me put it this way. Words have reference. When you speak a word, you mean something. When I say clock, the word clock is a word. And this is the object, referent. Shabdartha in Sanskrit. Shabda, clock. Artha, this. This is the object. Similarly, mic, word. This is the object. Flower, it's a word. That's the object. Body, it's the word. This is the object. Now, when we all use words, we all mean the same thing by those words. When I say clock, when I'm talking about this clock, I mean this clock. When you say clock and you mean this clock, you mean this clock. All of us, when we say clock, we mean this thing. Now, so all of us use words in the same way. Otherwise, conversation wouldn't be possible. If you meant something by chair and you meant by chair a table and I meant by chair a cookie, we couldn't talk to each other. We all mean the same thing by the same words. But notice, there's one unique word. I. All of us use the word I. But by that, each of us means a unique, different thing, not the same thing. By I don't mean what you mean by I. By I, she doesn't mean what you mean by I. Each of us means something else by I. So is this word I an exception to the rule? What is the rule? When you use words, they must mean the same things. But when we use the word I, what does it refer to? Something separate? If you follow Vedanta, the rule is re-established. Because Vedanta says ultimately the I refers all the time when we are saying I, we all refer to the same thing actually. The Atman, which is one for all of us. But we don't know that. Why don't we know that? Why is this peculiar situation? Because the I, as it functions, because of its function, what has happened is, it is not really the fault of the I. There is this veil of ignorance which hides the real Atman, the real self. And the I, instead of referring to the real self, it now refers to body-mind. And each case, body-mind is different. So the I now begins to refer to different things, different persons. So this is how it is going on. Now it's a false situation. We are the witness. We are the witness of the I. Forgetting ourselves, we have identified ourselves with the I. So the first thing to do is to break away from the shackles of the I. That's why, though ultimately the I is not to be blamed, but right now the real villain is I, when we are in bondage, when we are in samsara. Every religious path, every spiritual path, it targets that I, the ego. Whether it is the path of devotion, where the I, the ego, is minimized in the front of a bigger I, God. We make ourselves smaller and smaller and smaller till we make the ego disappear. And thus is the real self set free. Or in the path of karma yoga, where the I is minimized, the I of the others is maximized. I sacrifice this little life for the welfare of others. Just the reversal of what I've been doing so far. Everything for I. This little I, this little ghost in the body. Everything in the universe is pulled to this. Food and riches and pleasures and name and fame and success and praise, all of it in service of what? This little I. And this is the little I we don't know. It's like a ghost in the machine. Now in Karma Yoga, that is reversed. You say the I, not I, but this. All the world, whatever they need, unselfish action. Life lived unselfishly. Swami Vivekananda says, let all vision cease. You realize that you are the Atman. Or if you cannot, dream but truer dreams, which are eternal love and service free. It's still a dream, still within ignorance, but much better. It reduces the I. In Raja Yoga, through Samadhi, Chitta Vritti Nirodha, all the functionings of the mind, all thoughts, including I thought, is shut down, at least for a short while. And in Jnana, the real referent of the I is discovered. Referent, clock word, clock object. I word, what? Atman, but right now, body mind. So in Vedanta, that is, by investigation into the I, the real, what does the I really refer to? That is discovered. Again, you have to get rid of that small I. And Sri Ramakrishna put it this way, the ripe I and the unripe I. So he says, even after all of this, by bhakti, by karma yoga, by meditation, or ultimately by Vedantic self-inquiry, the ultimate path, all of this, you discover the reality. But I will come back. He says the rascal will come back. Now you have to give it a status now. What was its status? All powerful, the great ego, I was completely one with it. Now I know I am not it. Mano buddhya hankara chittani naham. First step is to see that I am not any of the functions of the mind, including ego. I am not mind, I am not intellect, I am not memory, I am not ego. Now it comes back again. Then Sri Ramakrishna says, you have to give it a status. What is the status? He says, let the rascal remain. In Bengali, he says, Thakshala dasami hoy. Let it remain as the servant I. The Lord is my master, I am the servant. This is a devotional attitude. Or, if you are on the path of knowledge, he says, let it remain as Ami nitya shuddho buddho mukto atma. I am the eternal, ever pure, ever shining consciousness, the Atman. That's also the small I speaking. But it's that knowledge helps it to transcend its little nature. It points to the Atman. One more point. This is from the Panchadashi. The word I has three meanings. The word I has three meanings. One meaning for those who are in ignorance, and two meanings for those who are enlightened. For those who are in ignorance, the word I meaning means the referent. Clock meaning this object. I meaning this body and mind. For whom? For the ignorant. That's meaning number one. What is the meaning number one? Body mind. I means body mind. For whom? Ignorant person. Then the two other meanings for enlightened. For the enlightened person. After enlightenment, I realize that I am not the I. Chidananda Rupa Shivoham. I am of the nature of pure consciousness. I am of the nature of Shiva. I am of the nature of Shiva. That is my nature. I shine upon the I. I am the witness of the I. But I am not the I itself. I am not a thought. So that is the real meaning of the I, which is known to the enlightened person. What is I? Aham Brahmasmi. There is no longer the little I. The little I points to Brahman. So Aham Brahmasmi. That is the real knowledge of the I, which is known to or which is realized by enlightened people. And they use I in a third sense. Again to refer to body and mind, but not truly so. Just for transacting with us. When Sri Ramakrishna says, I will have a glass of water, sometimes he refers to the body and mind as this. He looked at his picture, he said, this will be worshipped and in households from time to come. This. Or sometimes he says, my hand is broken, or I shall drink a glass of water, I shall go to Calcutta. What will go to Calcutta? Brahman will go to Calcutta? No. this body and mind will go to Calcutta. But instead of speaking in that roundabout way, put this body and mind in one carriage and take it to Calcutta, he says, I'll go to Calcutta. Yeah. And Vedanta says, approves of it. He says, after enlightenment, don't be weird. Don't be weird. Yes, he says, just speak like everybody else. Act like everybody else. Vyavahara must continue. The transactions of the world must continue. Don't disrupt it. You know the truth. But now you have the two senses of the I. The I as Satchidananda, which is known to you, which is a clear reality for you. And the I as body and mind, which you use in order to interact with people. And let that continue. I have seen any number of people, very enthusiastic Vedanta people, the students, writing to me, I, who have now appearing as body and mind and with the name Mishra, I'm writing to you, the same pure consciousness in the body and mind of Sarvapriyananda with this question. Don't do that. Just say that, I am Mr. Mishra writing to you, Swami. And Vedanta approves of it. That's the third meaning of the I. You're not lying. It's the third meaning of the I. So I has three meanings. One, generally, which people use, body and mind. That's the common meaning. Second one, after enlightenment, aham brahmasmi. Third, after enlightenment, in a secondary sense, as the body mind. In Sanskrit, it's called gaunartha. I think we have run out of time. We'll keep the questions for next time. All right, we had an intense session. I see the questions are getting more and more subtle and more difficult, but very good. Please take care, stay safe, stay well. Let the blessings of Thakur Ma and Swamiji be upon us in this new year. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ram Krishna Arpanamastu.